Ghost of Tsushima is a combat adventure game set during the Mongol invasion of Japan in the late 13th century. Mainly combat based, it also features elements of stealth, RPG and exploration. It comes from Sucker Punch, the developers of Infamous. You are Jin Sakai, an orphaned samurai lord under the tutelage of your uncle when the Mongols attacked the island of Tsushima. Rather than batten down the hatches and hold out for reinforcements, the island's ruler, your uncle, decides to take all of his men down to the beach to head the invasion off at the pass. It doesn't go well. You're dragged from the battlefield and nursed back to health, only to find that the Mongols have pretty much taken the entire island. Here you realise that the honour-bound code by which you fight is simply going to get you killed. It is in fact what got your fellow samurai killed, and you'll have to adapt to survive and defeat the enemy. So with the help of a thief named Yuna and a smattering of other assorted rebels, you have to learn to kill with stealth and cunning and assemble what's left of the island's fighters to free your uncle and retake the island. One of the clear main talking points of Ghost of Tsushima is the visuals and the amount of effort taken to create a 13th century Japanese aesthetic. I can honestly say that this is one of the best looking games I have ever seen. This is the only game to come close to Horizon Zero Dawn in terms of visuals. Everything from the details and how the grass sways in the wind to how the sunlight reflects off the surface of water is immaculate. There's genuinely not been a better advertisement for HDR OLED TVs. The combat varies with 4 different stances, each designed for a different type of enemy. There's one for swordsmen, spearmen, shieldmen and big men. The differences between is purely visual with some different moves and combos, but they're all triggered with the same buttons. Each stance can be powered up to be even more effective against their chosen targets and to have longer combos. Alongside your trusty katana and tanto is a bow, a longbow, kunai throwing knives, bombs and a poison blowgun. Each can be powered up or given alternate abilities as your legend grows and you accumulate technique points to spend on them. Your legend grows as you complete missions and save civilians in random events. A unique point to the combat is the ability to challenge enemies to a standoff. Simply enter an enemy base or wander into an encounter and you'll be presented with this. You and an opponent stand apart and you have to release the triangle button right as your opponent is about to hit you, killing him in one blow, and then, depending on the level of your ability, more of his mates might rush in at that point, allowing you to cut them down too in extremely graphic and satisfying fashion. It's really an interesting way of handling bases in random encounters and I really like it. I have to point out also that this has been ruined by the designers. As I was writing the review, patch 1.05 dropped and this has severely altered the timing on the standoffs, making them next to impossible to complete properly. Well fucking done, lads! However, there's not an awful lot to like about this game, unfortunately. The combat is the main focus of the game and it's implemented quite badly. It uses either a quick attack or a strong one, a parry and a block, and a dodge. The combat's meant to be quick, brutal and intense, but what they've got is combat that's fiddly, overwrought and complicated. See, there's no lock-on, so often you'll miss with attacks, which only serves to make it even more difficult when fighting the constant group of enemies that you'll encounter. Most of the enemies require multiple hits to drop, even after you've broken their guard, with some of the larger brute enemies needing up to 7 or 8 hits before going down. Combine this with your hero needing only 3 or 4 hits, even at the higher levels, to go down, gives a lot of the combat a dull, needlessly stretched out feel as you constantly retreat to heal. Speaking of needlessly stretched out, a lot of the attacks involve huge movements that leave you wide open as you use them, making them pointless for a lot of the enemies they're supposed to be used against. For example, the wind stance, the anti-spearman stance, has a stupid jump spin attack as its lead. This would be useless against any enemy wielding a polearm, let alone a spear. The designers even realised this, as one of the power-ups of the wind stance is an automatic parry whenever you're using it. Speaking of the parry, the timing is way off. It's near impossible to get the timing down and it's changed with almost every patch that they've released. Unblockable attacks are signalled by one of 2 colours, one can be parried and the other can't. Just dodge both and don't even fucking bother. I'm amazed how poorly implemented the parry function is, especially given that there's an entire skill tree dedicated to it. The pinnacle of the combat is undoubtedly the duel sections. It's also here where the combat falls apart the most, as all its flaws are laid bare. Here the game's samurai cinema influences are front and centre with the long unskippable intros that are all the same. Firstly, the auto-aim barely works. Standard attacks have it, but any charge attacks don't for some reason. The enemies will just spam you with strings of unblockable attacks, forcing you to dodge out of the way of most of them. Unfortunately, the game only registers a dodge for the first enemy attack, meaning that if there's another swing coming, the enemy will zip along the ground to land the next hit, rendering the entire dodge function basically useless. Nothing ruins the sense of tension in a duel more than rolling away from one kick only to see the opponent rubber band about 10 feet to hit you with the second one. Plus, the enemies require insane amounts of damage to finish off, whereas you'll be lucky to survive past your 5th hit. Some of the duel opponents will soak up as many as 30 before you can finish them off. I've mentioned the samurai cinema influence, so I'll expand on that now. A huge amount of publicity has been made about the designers taking Akira Kurosawa movies as their main source of influence. Maybe they should have clarified that as a purely visual influence, because they see absolutely none of the subtlety or nuance in any of Kurosawa's movies in Ghost of Tsushima. None even of the humour. Advertising Kurosawa as an influence on a game that completely glosses over the anti-violent stances that his movies extolled is either disingenuous or borderline insulting. The biggest evidence of this is their joke of a Kurosawa mode. It's basically a crappy black and white grain filter, and don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. Such is the lack of thought put into the mode that it's actually quite difficult to play the game while using it. Trying to aim arrows with any accuracy when everything is a poor shade of grey is near impossible. Also, the cutscenes, which is what clearly the mode was designed for, don't suit the mode either, as the camera doesn't move in the same way that the cameras do in Kurosawa's movies. Basically, the Kurosawa mode is a mode for people who've no experience or understanding of Akira Kurosawa, which also includes the game designers. It seems that the bigger influences on this game are other games, namely Far Cry, Ass Creed and Infamous. The open world mechanics are lifted almost entirely from Far Cry. The enemy have bases which can be cleared out to earn rewards. Clear the bases out in a certain manner or by completing certain tasks, like killing a certain number of enemies with a particular weapon, will earn you a bigger reward. Simply rinse and repeat. The grinding side quests and the sheer amount of them bring about the unfavourable Ass Creed comparisons. The game has a curious split personality where it's giving you a world that's beautiful and begging to be explored, but then packs it with so much side quests and ancillary filler that you can't focus on anything else. This game is just desperate to keep you busy. Pity that virtually all the side quests are just rinse and repeat kind that you'll find in every generic open world game. All of the different villages are the same as well, meaning that outside of the plant life, there's almost no variation in the landscape. At least they've hit a novel idea with the navigation. The wind blowing you in the direction of the objective is a wonderfully novel touch, and a lot of effort clearly went into making it work seamlessly. The reaction of the environment to all the gusts is stunning. I should sandwich this with something positive, and I'll follow up that the voice acting, mocap and music are all exceptional. The voice acting in particular really comes into its own during the cutscenes. The cast all give superb performances, with Patrick Gallagher putting in a particularly good turn as Khotun Khan. It's just a shame that such a good cast, who are all quite good voice actors, are given such a poor story to act through. The storyline in Ghost of Tsushima has been described as The Lone Ranger, but in Japan, and it's nothing of the sort. The main hole in that lazy interpretation is that the Lone Ranger doesn't kill anyone. In fact, you often have to be forced into using his guns. In Ghost of Tsushima, you're cutting down people by the boatload right from the start, and utilising any means possible to kill as many enemies as possible, even resorting to poisoning. Another key facet of the story is Jin's struggle with how his methods conflict with the honour system he was raised under and upheld by his uncle. It's here that I feel a far better development group than Sucker Punch would have really crafted something special. You get a few flashbacks from Jin whenever you use a new stealth method for the first time, and then that's it. Every other cutscene shows Jin fully leaning into his ghost persona. In fact, by the end, I was siding with his uncle, who was horrified by the desperate, sadistic monster his nephew has become. Half the time, Jin doesn't even need to use the terror tactics he's gotten so used to. One scene has you sneak around the base to poison the enemy's milk supply. Jin justifies this as the base is heavily defended, but in moving through it, it contains no less people than half the other sections you've cleared out before. There's no point to this entire scene other than to clunkily set up the standoff between Jin and his uncle, who at this stage is fully disgusted by the terrorism Jin is employing. It's this arc which fully highlights how poor the writing is. This level of conflict is just pure gold to a competent writing team. The internal conflict in Jin as he struggles to maintain his honour. His conflict with his uncle who implores him to cease his barbarism. There's so much to work with here. but they just paint the characters by numbers and jettison any notion of subtlety in the process. Here, Jin is presented as the warrior simply doing what needs to be done to free his country, and his uncle is too much of a traditionalist curmudgeon to understand this. Whereas, in reality, it's Jin's uncle that they inadvertently make the most human. He points out that in resorting to the terror tactics, Jin and his allies have become no better than the Mongols. Jin, rather than attempting to reason with his uncle that they need to change their tactics in order to survive, simply doubles down and ends up resorting to chemical warfare at one point. When his methods are in turn used on his own people by the Mongols, who are simply matching like for like, he shows no signs of self-awareness that it's his own barbaric tactics that drove the Mongols to this, and that he should share part of the blame. It's here that subtlety in writing really becomes essential. By just plastering over all this detail, Sucker Punch have washed out all of the finer points that make characters seem alive. Not just stock figures, but living entities with their own agency. This is what marks out good writing from the bland. Sucker Punch have lined everything up perfectly and then completely screwed the landing. In their efforts to cram as much detail into the scenery, they ignored the finer details that matter, the ones in their characters. And it's the characters that tell the stories, make it real, and make it memorable. Research the fineries of 13th century Japanese architecture all you want, but if you don't populate it with anyone real or memorable, then all you've got is a nice well-drawn box. Ghost of Tsushima is an undeniably beautiful experience, but it's a shallow, repetitive one. Like a stunningly well-framed shot of a puddle. Yeah, it looks good, but there's no depth here.